One of the DR650's known issues is the failure of the output seal, which sits beneath this cover and ultimately behind the final drive sprocket that drives your chain. Now, when this seal fails, it basically drains your entire crankcase of oil, and it dumps it out right here in front of the rear tire, which is even more fun, right? Now, I don't believe this is as common an issue as people worry about, but it was certainly a big enough issue that in 2012, Suzuki DR650s came with a seal retainer bracket that ensures that that seal cannot pop out. Now, on my friend Carl's bike, when I inspected it, he actually had the seal retainer installed. Now, I purchased one of these recently, and today we're going to install it on my DR650 to ensure that I don't have any problems with this moving forward. Now, I believe this is a relatively simple process from what I've researched, but I thought it'd be nice to do a small video on how to do this so that you also know how to do it. And it's pretty cheap. I think it was like $15 for this part. So anyway, let's get to work on this today on Dino's Tinker Shed. Now the first thing you got to do is to take this cover off, and it's held in place by 3 8mm headed bolts. One on the top and 2 on the bottom. Now mine only has 2 bolts, and I discovered this when I bought the bike. It looks like the bottommost bolt was actually snapped off, and they tried to drill this out. You can see it here, but we're unsuccessful, so I haven't bothered. 2 bolts seems to hold the cover on okay. And this exposes what I believe to be the 2 bolts that hold in the new retainer, this top one and this bottom one here. We're going to verify that with a dry fit first. And we also need to take off the sprocket, which is held in place by these 3 bolts here. Now I'm going to jack this up onto the stand to begin with, just to get it up nice and high. And I'm going to loosen off the chain. So I'm going to mark the chain adjusters here just so I get it back into the right place. And then I'll just use an impact wrench and loosen off the 24mm nut on the outside here. Now once those loose, I'm just going to push it forward and temporarily tighten the nut just so it holds the wheel forward and keeps the chain loose. And then it's just a matter of looking at the sprocket. Now see how it wiggles here? This is normal. The sprocket sits on that spline shaft. It's nothing to worry about. So I'm going to take a 10mm socket, and I'm going to remove these 3 retaining bolts. And what these bolts do is they hold the lock ring on the outside and attach it to the actual sprocket on the inside, and prevents it from both sliding off the spline shaft, but it also prevents the sprocket from sliding too far into the cover itself and grinding on the side covers of the bike. So you can see it just sort of comes off, and then once that's in place, you just slide the sprocket off here and it exposes the shaft. Now when you put it back on, remember it does have a shoulder. The shoulder goes to the inside of the bike itself. Now I'm just going to take some brake cleaner. I think it's going to give the area a decent cleaning. All of this oil and debris here is from the chain lube. It's not from the actual seal itself. There's no evidence that my seal's leaking, and you really need to check that before you put the retainer in. You don't want to put a retainer on a seal that's actually leaking already. Now you can see the seal's in good condition, and I just take a look at the spline shaft as well to make sure that it looks like it isn't damaged, and this one looks fine. And this little nub here actually lines up with the retainer ring. I thought that the little nub on the retainer ring was for a weeping hole, but it's not. And I just dry fit it here to verify that those 2 nuts that I originally thought were the right ones, and they are. This one here and this one up here. These are the bolts that we have to remove. So I use a 10mm socket, and I back this bolt out all the way and pull it out. And the top one I'm going to undo, and you can see it holds this one cable grab and a grounding strap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it out, leave the bolt inside of those little lugs there, and set it to the side. It kind of keeps everything together. And then we're just going to install the actual oil seal here, and we're going to slide that bolt back in. And you can see how well the molded bracket actually fits around the case cover itself. So we'll put the top bolt in and then the bottom bolt. And I'll use my impact gun just to run up the bolts to the face. I'm not going to actually tighten it with the impact here. I'm going to run them up. And then I'll follow this up by hand just to snug them. And although you don't see it on screen here, I do come back with a torque wrench. And I believe these are 97 inch-pounds is what you torque these to. There we go. I'll just put the wire clip back in place. And you can see how it looks as it's finished. Now I'm just going to go ahead and clean up all of the sprockets and inspect them. So I just use a little bit of brake cleaner and a stiff nylon brush to go through and clean both the sprocket and the retainer and the small bolts themselves. And all of this goo that's on here again is the chain lube that I use. That Motul chain lube is super sticky. You can kind of see here everything's nice and clean, but the actual retaining bolts still have a little bit of blue Loctite in the threads. So I'm going to take them over to the brass wire wheel on my grinder and just give them a nice clean up so that they thread in nice and cleanly, and the new blue Loctite that I'm going to use will have the best chance of setting properly onto the sprocket. And speaking of the sprocket, I'm just going to give it a quick overlook. This one's in pretty good shape. The teeth are nice and straight. There's no real hooking or little pointy teeth. It's probably about 50% worn before I need to change it. So remember, that shoulder goes to the inside towards the case cover. I'm just going to put it inside the chain and slide it over top of the sprockets. It looks like I could probably afford to clean my chain too. It looks a little bit dirty here. And once we make sure that the chain's set, we're going to put the retainer ring on so it slides over the splines, and then you turn it inside the retaining groove to line it up with the holes on the sprocket. And again, I'm going to use a little bit of medium strength blue Loctite. This is non-permanent, so you can take it out, but it will stop it from vibrating out. And I'm going to thread these into the holes. And I'm just going to snug them up here with a 1/4 inch drive socket, and then I'll come back in and torque these back down. And you can see here the drive sprocket bolts come in at 53 inch-pounds of torque. Here we go. This looks good. Now I'm just going to, retighten the chain and tighten that down just to make sure that it's nice and square. And I'll take this opportunity to put some more Motul on there and really goober it up again so that it can make a big mess. And then really it's just a matter of putting the case cover back on, or the chain guard cover, and we're ready to go. We're just about done.
And that really is all that it takes to do the seal retainer bracket on these bikes. It's pretty simple. For me, it took me probably about 45 minutes because of the filming. But for most people with just basic tools, it's probably going to take you about half an hour by the time you clean the area up and check the sprocket and everything. It's not hard at all, and it's something you can do. I know you can. It's not hard. So another little point, when you're done with your torque wrenches, make sure to loosen them off so that they don't sit with the tension on them. It's a good little tip to make sure you get the maximum life out of your torque wrenches. So until next time, I'm Dino for Dino's Tinker Shed. You have a nice day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye now.